former Catholic turned Hindu and a former Muslim turned Christian walk into a church and have a dialogue. That's exactly what happened between me and Fred Stella, a former Catholic who became a Hindu, where we talked about the question, why I converted. That's this week's episode of All Rise. So let's get right to it. I was raised as a Shia Muslim. There's the big sects within Islam are the Sunni and the Shia and the Shia are a minority, but they're a very large minority. And I grew up in the States. I was born in the States, raised in the States, and I thought that I didn't believe in this whole idea of what's true for you is true for you, what's true for me is true for me. I believed in the idea of truth being something that was either true, even if no one believed it, or something could be false, even if everyone believed it. So we needed to find out what was true. And I thought Islam was the cat's whiskers. I thought it was the thing that was true, and so I would engage with people who were not Muslims about why they were probably wrong, and I was probably right. From a young age, I would do this. I would engage in these conversations, and what I would do is, I wouldn't thump my Quran at them or something like that or be angry about it. I just would have conversations. And those conversations usually went something like this. Not every time, but usually like this. I would talk to a Christian, and I would say, and by the way, I was an equal opportunity faith knocker outer over. It wasn't just Christians I was after. They were just low-hanging fruit. The question I would start off with was, why are you a Christian? And most Christians didn't think of a why when it comes to faith. I just am. I don't know. They'd say that, I'm a Presbyterian. Why? And they'd say, well, we go to the Presbyterian church on Christmas and Easter, so I'm Presbyterian. I'm like, that sounds like a question, not an answer. Are you even sure you know why? And they would say, you don't think these things through. And I said, well, actually, as a matter of fact, you do think these things through. I've thought it through for you. Why would you trust your eternal destiny to a worldview that someone else thought through? Why would you do something like that? You don't do that with your retirement or your schooling. Why would you do it with your destiny? So I would say, here's my 5 reasons that I've thought through about why you shouldn't be a Christian anymore, and you should probably be a Muslim. And I would launch into it. Now, the important thing here that factors into how I became a Christian is that for me, there was a central doctrine of Islam that was very, very valuable. In fact, so valuable is this doctrine that it's got a name. You have the Hebrew Shema. It's so important. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. It's so important, it's got a name. Well, in Islam, there's a phrase that's so important it has a name, and that name is takbir. And the phrase that Muslims say all the time is Allahu Akbar. Now, you've heard this phrase before, and you've heard it in unfortunate circumstances, but most Muslims say Allahu Akbar as a prayer and a praise. It means God is greater. So for the Muslim, God's greatness is the central thing to aspire to. The central object of our worship is the God who is incomparably great. There can be no God greater than the one and only true God. So I thought that Christianity insulted God's greatness. This idea of the Trinity makes no sense. The idea that the God who is so great to create this universe gets trapped in a body that sweats, bleeds, gets bad breath, and then dies at the hands of the sinners he created on this cross, which I thought made no sense. These ideas insulted God's greatness, and I would go after Christians on this idea. Well, 2 guys came to the door of the apartment complex I was living at when I was an undergraduate, and they were 2 Baptist guys, and they were talking about Jesus to people. And no one would give them any time of day, but I did. I was like, sweet, you guys deliver. So they came into the apartment, and I made them uncomfortable quite a bit. And I wanted to knock the faith out of these guys, but I loved these guys. They were such good guys, and they loved me. We had a mutual desire for each other's salvations, as it were. So I got a Bible, and I was trying to find a contradiction, something inherently contradictory. Matthew says this, and Luke says not this about Jesus. And I'm reading Luke chapter 3, verses 7 and following, and it strikes me. John the Baptist says to those who were coming to him, he says, do not even think to yourself that you have Abraham as your father, as if that would save them from God's judgment. The heritage is going to save you. He said, because I can tell you that God will raise up children of Abraham from the stones. In other words, your heritage isn't important as far as salvation goes. God can make one just like you out of a rock. Now, this struck me because I was asking Christians, why are you a Christian? And they would say tradition, and I'd say not good enough. And then John the Baptist is saying the same thing to me in this book that I doubted. And it suddenly struck me, what a hypocrite. You're willing to make everybody else uncomfortable. Are you willing to make yourself uncomfortable and actually go after what is true regardless of your tradition? Now, I was fully confident Islam would win the day, but that began a 9-year search. into the historical, philosophical, theological, even scientific underpinnings of various worldviews. It wasn't just Islam and Christianity. Those took up the bulk of my time, but Eastern religion, non-religion, atheism, all these things. I looked into these isms and schisms, as it were, to find out where the truth was. And at some point, to make a long story just a little longer, I found not only the historical evidence compelling, that what we have now is what they wrote then. And what they wrote then actually told the story of what happened then. And the cross and resurrection and all these things were really starting to speak to me on an intellectual level. But then that which I was hoping was true in Islam, I found to be actually true in the gospel. Because remember what I said, the idea of God's greatness. God, Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest possible being. If God is the greatest possible being, then he would express the greatest possible virtue. It stands to reason. And that greatest possible virtue is love. And if he is the greatest possible being, he would express the greatest possible virtue in the greatest possible way. And what is the greatest possible way to express the greatest possible virtue? The greatest way to express love is self-sacrifice. That's exactly what the cross is. It's all about the idea that though we don't deserve this, and though we are at enmity with God, he sacrifices for us. If we can do it, if we can sacrifice for those who we love and love us back, ought not God be able to do at least as well as we do? But then I remember where I was when I read Romans chapter 5, verse 8, that God is greater than us. Again, that greatness issue. Romans 5, verse 8 says that for God demonstrates his love for us, his incomparable love, in that while we were sinners, not those who love God, but those who hate him, Christ died for us. The greatest possible being, expressing the greatest possible virtue in the greatest possible way. And it was not only theologically compelling, but it was also historically accurate as I was studying these things. And when I realized that everything I was looking for in one worldview was actually found in this worldview, I realized I have to give my life to this. And then I did.
That's awesome. Thank you, Abdu. So fun for me just to hear him articulate his conviction, because back when I met Abdu, again, 15 years ago or so, he was still a practicing attorney. You gave up practicing law?
I'm still licensed as an attorney. I paid a lot of money for that license. I am not letting that go. But I'm doing full-time ministry now.
Yeah. And lives in the Detroit area. Had the privilege of being to his home and meeting his family. As it turns out, both of our guests are Detroit people, smitten with the mitten, as they may say. Fred Stella, as you're going to hear, has one of the greatest voices that I am also jealous of as a preacher. But Fred is from the Grand Rapids area.
I live in Grand Rapids now, yes. But from Detroit.
From Detroit also. Detroit sports fans?
Yeah, I don't have much of a choice.
Okay. Fred, we'd love to just have a chance to get to know you and your unique journey of conversion.
Well, first of all, Jeff and everyone else connected on staff, all of the decision makers, I want to thank you for putting this on, and I want to thank all of you for coming here. If this event is not unique, it is certainly rare. I've spoken at many churches over the past 20, 25 years, but they tend to be mainstream or left of center, like Episcopalian, Methodist, United Church of Christ, and Unitarian, if you want to count them. These are the people. So, for instance, if you ask someone from an evangelical congregation, who is Jesus? They'll talk about Son of God, Messiah, da-da-da-da. You can always tell a liberal Christian, when you say, who is Jesus? They always start with, Jesus was a Jew. And sometimes they'll go on, sometimes they won't. Let's just leave it at that, and then you can believe what you want to believe. I'll say one other thing real quick, too. No, this is not a debate. Quite frankly, I wish it was a debate. I really do.
We can do it.
And if it was, I would let him win because he bought me lunch. And I get bought cheap, just for future reference. No, I am in a bit of an unenviable position because here I am saying that basically, I was one of you. Yes, my tradition was Roman Catholic, and primarily the people here would label themselves evangelical Christian. But let's face it, you share more than you don't share with Catholicism. You agree on most of the main points. So here I am coming and saying, I have rejected that. And it reminds me, I don't know, how many of you have ever broken up with someone? And of course, when you break up with someone, the first thing they say is, what did I do? And what is your response always? It's not you, it's me. So that's my blanket answer for everything I say today, okay?
It's not you, it's me.
Okay, so what happened, why I am a Hindu is basically the same reason that you two are Christians, and I would say the vast majority of everybody here, if not the entirety of this audience, is Christian, is because it is what you believe. You genuinely believe in the tenets of Christianity. I was a pretty good Catholic kid. I loved my religion, and I loved going to church. And then at the age of 13, I really started to question the basic tenets. And I came to the point where it wasn't a struggle. A lot of people go through tremendous struggles of doubt. But for me, it was almost like, I just don't think I believe this anymore. No, I don't believe this. And I realized that when I go to church, can I assume, let me ask you this, gentlemen, can I assume that even though perhaps in this church you do not recite the Apostles' or Nicene Creed, would you guess if everybody knows the creed? Okay.
I assume so.
I could no longer recite some of the tenets of the creed. Some I could. I believe in God, the Father Almighty. And then another line would come, yeah, okay, I can say that. But I couldn't say everything with conviction. But I had nothing to replace it with. Now, I liked being a Catholic. I'm Italian American. The two, it's hard to separate that, right? You know, when you grow up with breads named after saints, it's kind of a thing, right? So I was going to Catholic school, and I was going to church with my family. It didn't occur to me for a minute to say, Mom, Dad, take me out of my Catholic school. Mom, Dad, I'm not going to Mass. No, not a thing. I knew there was something really, really good about what they, meaning the church, was doing and the kind of instruction I was receiving. But then when I was 15, going to a Catholic high school, I took a world's religions class. And we studied all of the major world religions, Christianity, obviously, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism. And for some reason, when we got to Hinduism, and it was explained to me, and the teacher was very good about being neutral with no bias, yeah, that resonates. This particular belief resonates with me. And then I remembered that I've always been a big Beatles fan, and I remember that in 1968, when I was like 11 or 12, the Beatles went to India to learn how to meditate, and I remember how fascinated I was with that. And it would trivialize this experience I had to say, oh, well, he just, followed a rock band doing what they're doing. And it's not that, because a year before, they were touting the benefits of LSD. And I was not going, oh, well, then I got to do LSD if the Beatles. No, I was deeply disappointed in them. I was anti-drug, at the age of 11. I thought something's really wrong with that kind of culture. So when they moved to study Eastern philosophy, I went, now there's something there, I think. So from that point, at the age of 15, taking that class, I started to study. And I continued my study, and I incorporated just a few spiritual practices in my daily life. I didn't go whole hog, and I still would have said, if you asked me, what religion are you? I would have said, I'm a Catholic. Up until the time I was in my early 30s, all right? A lot of people, they have these profound conversion experiences, and one day they're this, the next day they're that. Well, as my wife would attest to, I've always kind of avoided commitment when I could get away with it. But when I commit, it's a guarantee. I stake my life on once I make a commitment. And so at that point, that is when we would use the term fully embraced the Dharma. That is when I finally sort of woke up and said, who am I kidding? I believe this, I practice this. Because there are a lot of people who they borrow, if you will, or adopt is a better word. They adopt Hindu and Buddhist practices in the West, but they don't identify as a Buddhist or Hindu. So I was doing that for a while, and then finally I realized that this is who I was, and I have continued on that track up until today. And I am currently an ordained outreach minister for my local Hindu temple, and I'm...
What is the title of that position?
In Sanskrit, and I'm not asking you to memorize it, it's pracharak. And pracharak can mean a couple of different things, but we have translated it as outreach minister. So my goal is actually kind of doing things like this. I do tours of the temple. I am ordained to marry people and spiritual counseling and all of that.
Very nice.
So I think I just went a little bit above 5 minutes.
That's good. So did he.
I went way above 5 minutes. Don't even worry about it.
Just a little bit on the personal side, if we could. I mentioned already that Abdu was a lawyer. In addition to your ministry with the Hindu community, you also have a career outside of that. Can you share just a bit?
Really? I can't take the fifth on this one?
On advice of counsel. I'm kidding.
Okay. I'm a commercial actor. And the reason I'm hesitant to say that is because, I don't know, I don't want the people to think I'm up here acting, that I'm sort of playing a role or anything like that, but I'm a commercial actor. Much of my work involves the narration of audiobooks, but I do corporate work. I'm in an occasional independent movie. I've done a little bit of television, but nothing you've probably ever seen. So that's what I do.
And you've been married to Teresa for?
For 30 years, yes. And she is also someone similar to me. She came from a European, mostly German ethnic background, Roman Catholic. And it's funny because when I was very seriously looking for a life partner, marrying an Indian Hindu was not realistic where I was in Grand Rapids because there wasn't a great population, and it's like every female was either 10 or 50. There was nobody in between. And I realized that, maybe the best partner for me would be an ex-Catholic Hindu. Now, that's a tall order. That's a tall order, but you know what? The Lord provides.
Oh, that's great. I love it. That's beautiful. And Teresa is also in acting and screenwriting.
That is correct, yes. And I can now publicly say, because I asked permission, she sold her second Hallmark film. She and her partner now wrote two. I don't know if anybody here ever saw it. It's an Easter-themed movie called The Blessing Bracelet. And she's got one. She wrote, they agreed to film it, and it looks like it's going to be a Christmas movie for 2026. Most likely, they say maybe we'll bump it up to 25, but they got their eye on 26. And it's not your formulaic Christmas Hallmark movie. It's a little bit more involved. Not to knock those wonderful formulaic ones, with the woman goes back to the small town and all of a sudden realizes the carpenter or the postman is the man for her. And it's not that.
This one has zombies.
The first one was interesting. It was a Christian movie. The Blessing Bracelet was Christian themed. She didn't write it as Christian, but the powers that be looked at it and thought this could be a really good vehicle for our faith-based line of cards, which is Dayspring. And so they said, could you make this Christian and Easter theme? She says, yeah. They go, but you're a Hindu yogi type person, aren't you? Do you know what Easter is? And she says, well, yeah. It's when Jesus comes out of the tomb, and if he sees his shadow, Don't mess with my wife, okay?
You know, one of the things that Fred just did is he quickly listed what's called the 5 major world religions. And I think they've all been mentioned quickly. It may be helpful if we just draw a few connections. You, Fred, kind of lumped Buddhism and Hinduism together. Can you explain the connection?
Yes, the connection is not terribly dissimilar from the connection between Judaism and Christianity. As I said a few minutes ago, Jesus was a Jew. The first Christians, even though they didn't use that term, Christian, they were Jewish. They were part of the synagogue until there was a schism and they evolved into their own religion. The Buddha was a Hindu. He was raised a Hindu, and similar to Jesus, he never called all his followers together and say, okay, we're not Hindu anymore, we're, what's a good name? Buddhist. Yeah, I'm the Buddha? Buddha. Yeah, that's who we are. It wasn't anything like that. And many people at that time, for a long time actually, just took Buddhism to be a sect of Hinduism. But it really did evolve into its own religion. But the practices and many of the beliefs are very similar.
Yeah.
We tend to use the G word a lot. They don't.
Yeah, gotcha. Towards that same end, Abdu, could you help everybody quickly see Judaism, Christianity, and Islam and how they're connected?
Sure. There's connections. There's some pretty serious differences, but all three would claim to be what's called an Abrahamic faith, which is that they trace their lineage, both in some senses ethnically and spiritually, back to Abraham, the father of the Hebrews. For the Muslims, for example, the Jews, it's obvious. Abraham is the father of the Hebrews. Sarah, the whole promise to Isaac, and a great nation will be born of you. That becomes the Hebrews, who become the Israelites, etc. And there's a promised Messiah through all that. For the Muslims, there is a claim to be affiliated to Abraham by virtue of his son Ishmael. Ishmael is his firstborn through Hagar, and that is their claim that Muhammad, the prophet Muhammad, came from the line of Ishmael, and the father of the Arabs essentially is Ishmael. And of course, Christians would say that the Abrahamic faith, in terms of their belief that Jesus is the Messiah, comes all the way from not only Jesus' lineage, his literal lineage, his physical lineage, back to Abraham, in fact, back to Adam, if you read the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, but it's also a spiritual thing because Jesus, as the Messiah, is promised through Abraham. So all three faiths are monotheistic faith. They believe that there is only one God, that God is the creator of all things. He is self-existent. He never began, and he will never end. He knows everything. He's all-powerful. He's all kind. He's all just. He's all these things. And he has self-sufficiency. So he doesn't need anything to explain his existence. Everything else is contingent. Everything else is created by God and so is distinct from God. And that's true of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism in the sense of Orthodox sort of biblical Judaism. So those are the commonalities. Islam shares some of the dietary laws that are extant in Judaism from the Old Testament. Some of the fasting things are very similar as well. And so there's a lot of commonalities in those senses, but there are some pretty significant differences, especially when it comes to Islam and Christianity, specifically on the character, nature, and the attributes of God.
Yeah.
And then who is Jesus? Honestly, if you were to say, what is the central difference between those three Abrahamic faiths? It's actually on the one person that they all talk about a lot. Well, I know the Jews talk about him a lot, but Muslims and Christians both have an affinity for Jesus. Muslims would say he's a prophet of God, a marvelous prophet of God who was born of a virgin, performed miracles, did all these wonderful things, but he's no more than that. And so even though they call him Jesus the Messiah, because the Quran refers to that word Messiah doesn't have a whole lot of meaning infused in it. And so it's assumed from the Christian scriptures, but of course Christians believe in the Orthodox, and I don't mean Orthodox capital O, I mean just Orthodoxy generally speaking in Christianity, that Jesus is not just a prophet, he is the Messiah, but he's also the Son of God.
Yeah.
And Muslims would reject that moniker.
Yeah. Abdu, you did a great job at explaining to us how the Trinity and the uniqueness of Christ as a human was so influential in your conversion.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, Fred, if you would take a moment and explain the concept of God within Hinduism.
Hey, we're taking a break from the content for just one quick second while I bring an important message to you. Embrace the Truth is a donor-supported ministry, and we simply couldn't do what we do without the generous support of people like you. If you've been encouraged or challenged by our content, would you consider becoming a ministry partner? Just go to embracethetruth.org and click the donate button in the top right corner, or head directly to embracethetruth.org/donate. Every gift, large or small, helps us continue to proclaim the truth with boldness and grace in a culture full of conflict that's also searching for meaning. Thank you so much for standing with us. Now, back to the content.
We refer to that ultimate divine consciousness as Brahman. Brahman would be God with a capital G. That's as close as we can come. And so what we understand is that Brahman always was, and naturally Brahman always will be. Now, Brahman in the uncreated, or better yet, unmanifested state, let's say before the Big Bang, before this universe was manifested, Brahman exists in a purely impersonal way. But then the divine manifested the universe. And here's a really good difference between Christianity and Hinduism. According to Thomas Aquinas, God created ex nihilo, meaning out of nothing. And this universe and everything in it is separate from God. Hindus believe that the divine manifested the universe and that this universe is a divine manifestation itself. It breathes God, if you will. But it is not God alone. There still is Brahman that exists beyond. So if the difference between what is called pantheism and panentheism, pantheism would say the world is God, but if the world blew up, there'd be no God. But panentheism indicates that, yes, the divine has expressed itself as a physical creation and becoming personal in that manifestation. And so now we have, I use the word creation right here, but manifestation is perhaps more accurate because I don't want to give the impression that there is separation. There is, of course, the idea, the understanding of separation, what we would call the illusion of separation. So we define God aside from the term Brahman. And if you want to get really technical, we do not ascribe, we have no problems with pronouns with Brahman. Brahman has no pronouns other than perhaps it. There's no male, female about Brahman. When we talk about divinity expressed in more personal terms, divinity can manifest as male or as female. So we often talk about the mother aspect, the feminine aspect of divinity, and the masculine. We're not talking about a god and a goddess. All is one. We're simply talking about how we may perceive them. So we have a relationship with them because the soul, or as we would term the Atman, is a part of that manifestation of divinity.
Yeah.
And one other thing that another word for divinity is Satchitananda. And Satchitananda means ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. So God is bliss, ever conscious of that bliss, and that bliss is ever new, meaning it just doesn't get old. And according to the Hindu scriptures, we can share in that everlasting Satchitananda, and actually we are all going to at some point, which we'll get into later.
Yeah. Brahman is viewed as the highest God among other gods?
Well, okay, so let's say I said he's God with a capital, or it is God with a capital G, right? Then you have those other deities that are mentioned in the Hindu scriptures that are often, not always, but often spelled with lowercase g's. And I'm sure you've heard these names like Shiva, Vishnu for male gods, and then Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Kali for goddesses. So the Hindus can look at these deities with the lowercase g's in a couple of different ways. So some of them, some Hindus will look at them very similar to angels. As a matter of fact, we call them gods and goddesses because who taught the Indians how to speak English? The British. And so the British started calling these other entities gods and goddesses, and so the Hindus, okay, they're gods and goddesses, that's fine. But the word that is used to translate to God or goddess is either deva for God, devi for goddess. And devi and deva do not translate to God, goddess perfectly. What they really mean is shining or illumined beings. All right? So some people, some Hindus can say these are actual entities that truly exist on another plane, and they can influence our life. There are other Hindus who say these are simply the personifications of the attributes of God. Let me give you an example. So Ganesh has an elephant's head. You may have seen pictures of a Ganesh, right? All right, so why does Ganesh have an elephant head? Think about this. 2,000-3,000 years ago, there's a Hindu teacher. He's trying to explain the concepts of God. And he looks off in the field, and there's an elephant. And he says, God can remove obstacles. And Ganesh is considered Vingeshwara, the remover of obstacles. Like, well, yeah, see how elephants can just mow through the jungle and nothing gets in the way? Well, that's kind of how God is. So the gods and goddesses to some Hindus are simply teaching tools. They're archetypes. And when you look at a statue or a picture of one of the deities, everything about it is symbolic. So you have your option of, is this a truly angelic being that somehow can grant boons or in any way be a positive influence on your life, or are they simply symbolic? And there's no issue because Hinduism is not dogmatic. You can choose whatever not what you want to believe, because quite honestly, we get the charge a lot. Hindus believe what they want to believe, and that's not true. Hindus believe what they are able to believe, and there is no coercion to go in one direction or the other, at least not ideally.
Yeah, thank you. Abdu, how would you point to differences in our view of God and the angelic?
Yeah, great question. The simple way is say, none of that stuff. No, I'm kidding. A lot of it's very different in the sense that first I was talking that God is eternally personal. He is an eternally personal being. He wasn't in any sense impersonal and became personal in any sense of the word. He was eternally personal, such that when the Bible says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 8 and in verse 16 that God is love, that doesn't mean that the concept was godlike. It means that God himself, as an actual being, is love. And a Christian would actually understand this through the concept of the Trinity. Now, what's interesting is the Trinity is actually my favorite topic to talk about. And the reason why it's my favorite topic to talk about is two. One, it was the doctrine I made the most fun of before I became a Christian. And two is because I think it explains so many things so beautifully about Christian theology. So many things are wrapped up in the ambit and within the orbit of the understanding of God as a triune being. So for example, God is eternally existent as one being, one what, in three whos. That one what is the substance. So if I were to say, for example, what is this thing? I'd say, what is this? And you could say a container, a plastic thing, a bottle, whatever you want to say. It's a water bottle, but what is its essence? What is its fundamental nature? It's a non-living thing. And you can point to me and you can say, what is that? It's slightly insulting, but you could do it. It's a totally logical question. What is that? My essence is living thing. I'm a living being. So I have a nature and the bottle has a nature. So the nature of something is what it is. And God is one what. He is one divine being. But you can't go to the bottle. Who is that? Because the bottle doesn't talk to you and doesn't have a conversation. And if they do, then you're hallucinating and they need to take you away. But you can say of me, who is that? I have a nature. The bottle has a nature. I have personhood. The bottle does not. So personhood is who someone is. So what something is and who someone is can be mutually exclusive ideas. The Trinity teaches that God is one what? One being, one divine being with three personhoods, three centers of consciousness, which are not each other. The Father is not the Son is not the Spirit is not the Father, yet they all share the same divine nature. They are all the same what, with three different consciousnesses, which means that from eternity past, God the Father loved God the Son, and God the Son loved God the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit loves the Father and the Son, and on it goes in eternity in the community of the Trinity. God never lacks love because God actually defines love, and he is self-existent. He always existed. So in that, there's this, I would say that that's an important difference because Christians understand God to be eternally personal and eternally loving and self-giving and the definer of all that is relationship, which explains why we're here. We'll get into that question, I'm sure, a little later, but there's an element to understand why we're here through a Trinitarian concept of God. For me as a Muslim, that was one of the most compelling things after I became a Muslim. By the way, I ascribed to the Trinity on faith. I believed everything else with having come to an understanding of some things. The Trinity, that one got me for a while. But I came to believe in its beauty later because remember what I said, God is great. There could be no being greater than God. And if God is great and God is self-existent, he needs nothing to explain his existence. And he's also relational. Well, then the problem is if he's one and only one, nothing exists for him to relate to because relation always requires an object. The Trinity solves that problem because God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit exist eternally in the one. And yet they relate to each other eternally. So God never needs to create anything outside of himself to be relational because he is relational in and of himself, which is why the Bible doesn't say just God is loving. It says God is love. So I went on a bit of a tangent there, but the point is that I think that's one of the fundamental things. That's a difference. I think the other thing on angelic beings is they are eternally distinct from God. They are not God-like. In the sense that they're, in any sense, demigods. And I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I'm saying that because my understanding was, and I could be wrong about this, and I'd love for you to correct me, is that some Hindus would say that maybe the various gods of Hinduism, Ganesh, Lakshmi, Hanuman, etc., are manifestations of the one.
Yeah,
kind
absolutely.
of like everything is, right?
No, you're solid. You're absolutely solid.
Yeah, and so a Christian would never say that Michael or Gabriel or the archangels or any of the angels or any of the demons for that matter are manifestations of God. The only thing that God's done is actually incarnated himself, or he's manifested himself at the temple, at the trees of Mamre and these kind of things, but those are theophanies, those aren't separate things in one sense. That's a huge, I think a big difference. Also, I think a big difference is the idea of the self. Is that we don't deny an idea of the self. We have an idea of the self. But for the Hindu, I would venture to say, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Atman, the self, is Brahman.
That is correct.
Tatvam asi,
that
thou
is
art that kind of thing.
That is the most real essence of us is a part of Brahman.
Yeah. And so that, as a fundamental difference, would be that the whole reason why this is all the way it is, why I don't have a better head of hair, why my eyesight's failing the older I get, is because the world is corrupted and fading, because our forebears, Adam and Eve, actually wanted to aspire to that idea of godhood. And the serpent comes along and says, God knows when you eat of that fruit, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil and all these things. And so that is a dangerous proposition that has consequences that we're facing now.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be a part of the big difference. And that essentially there's a reliance on, good works are really important in Christianity. People always say Christianity is not about good works. It's all about good works. Salvation's not about good works, but Christianity is all about good works because you're supposed to live that way. But it is reliance on a Savior who is not you to save you from you and the outside world as well. That's sinful as well, but there's a fundamental difference. And I think that would be a sort of a huge difference. It's not a Savior figure as much as sort of a realization, like a self-realization kind of a thing in Hinduism. And that would be a fundamental difference, I think, between the two faiths. Among several, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Thank you, Abdu. Fred, can I ask, what is the Hindu concept of origins. How did the universe, how did humanity become?
Very happy to answer that as best I can. Now, I wasn't there.
Okay.
But from what I hear, when Brahman is existing as pure consciousness, right, there is nothing but Brahman, nothing but divinity. But Brahman is, as I say, pure consciousness. And it is the nature of consciousness to create. We have consciousness, there is going to be creation. And again, I'm using this word advisedly. And so at some point in this lightless light, this darkless dark of infinity, Brahman, we use the term vibrated. Now, I think most of you are familiar with the word Om, right? Most people, they've seen it on TV or something. Somebody's chanting Om. Why would we chant Om? Because we believe that was the creative vibration of Om. And once that divinity vibrated, all of a sudden, stuff happened. There was sound and there was light, not necessarily the light of a sun or something, but there was energy. Energy manifested, sound manifested. And that we often compare to the Big Bang. And interestingly enough, the Hindu scriptures indicate, if you read the Vedas, which are the foundational scriptures, and you do the math, you'll see that Hindus acknowledge that the world, the universe, from the Big Bang, is somewhere between 9 and 10 billion years old. Science says it's somewhere over 13. So, some people believe the science, and then we have our young earthers who believe it's only 9 or 10 billion years old. So at that point, creation begins. The divinity enters into the manifestation that it brought about, and creation begins. Now, I know you wanted to, we can't talk about this without something else I believe you said you wanted to address, which is the problem of evil.
Let's do that.
Okay. There was no relativity in Brahman. Brahman, as I mentioned, lightless light, darkless dark. Words can only do so well in a situation like this. But there was no relativity. There was no light and dark. There was no heat and cold. But as soon as divinity vibrates and manifestation comes out, well, then you have to have relativity. You have to have this and you have to have that. And out of this came the understanding that we became a universe of opposites. So you couldn't have something good without something negative. Now, so the universe went along, it evolved itself into the planets and the star systems and the galaxies, et cetera, and then we had, at least we know here on Earth, I don't know about any other places, there's speculation, but we know for sure that life and intelligence are here. So where do we get evil from? As I mentioned, according to the Hindu scriptures, the very essence of humanity is the Atman, which is a part of Brahman. We often, one comparison that comes up a lot in the scriptures is the wave in the ocean. Okay, so if God is the ocean, we are the waves, meaning that we have some of the attributes. The wave is just as wet as the rest of the ocean. Its chemical composition is the same as the ocean. However, the ocean can exist just fine without the waves, but the waves need the ocean for existence. And what is the end result of every wave returns to the ocean. So essentially, we believe that every soul that emanated out of divinity is going to return to the bosom of divinity. But while we're here, we have this Atman. However, we also have another element called ahankara, which is ego. Now, and you can't, I'm using ego in a sense somewhat different from Freudian ego or just somebody who thinks a lot of themselves. Our ego basically identifies us as individuals. All right. Now, I'm gonna ask you both. Do you agree that the chairs we're sitting are solid, right? I mean, nobody has any problem. We're not afraid we're going to fall through these chairs.
That's right.
They're solid.
Yeah,
I think if we ask the audience, are these chairs solid? They probably say, oh yeah. What if a physicist raised their hand? What might he say about the solidity, the supposed solidity of these chairs?
Yeah, like the space between atoms and
Exactly.
such?
And if he's a quantum physicist, that it's all light waves anyway, right? You can't, there's no difference between the particles and the light waves and all. So Hinduism is a lot like that. There's always the apparent or the what I would say the lower reality, and then there's the higher reality. I would say the solidity of the chairs is the lower reality because it's just what we see at face value. The higher reality is when we really look inside the actual building blocks of what makes this chair. So there's a lot of both and, but they're not contradictory the same way saying the chairs are solid and they're not solid. When you explain the context, it's not contradictory.
Yeah.
So we have this divine origin. At the same time, we have this individuality. And we have to respect both. Because if we didn't respect the relative solidity of the chairs, we'd never sit down. And we need to sit down every now and then, take a load off our feet, right? So respecting that reality is important. And we do the same thing, acknowledging that divinity within us, but also knowing that this part that covers the Atma, the soul, has its own agenda. And the ahankara, or ego, can lead us to do a lot of dastardly things because it masks our true identity of divine origin. And when it does that, it can lead us to do really, really horrible things.
Would you call it evil?
Oh yeah, I would. Yeah, I would. Sure. You've got another word for it? I'm open.
Evil
but
works.
no, yeah, sure. When you talk about the horrendous things, I read an article in the paper today about a soldier who liberated the concentration camps. That's pretty evil. But what is evil is essentially one ultimate reality is I believe we are all connected. All right, there is a unity here. At the same time, I have to respect the fact that we are also separate. If a guy comes up to me and say, hey, you know, we're all one, I'd like to date your wife. I say no. Right? Because I am respecting the individuality that we all have here while still not thinking it a contradiction to say, ultimately, we are one. The more one sees this essential unity in humanity and basically the created universe, the more one is less likely to do evil things because then that person would realize that by hurting you, in a very real sense, I'm hurting me. And so we could go on for a little bit longer, but we won't. How's that?
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate that. Abdu, how would Christians view the origin of evil suffering?
Yeah, I want to, in debating whether or not to go here, not on this topic I very much want to do, but whether to go here from a personal standpoint, this is a topic that is not abstract for me. October 11th of 2024, my father was murdered. And I consider it absolutely scandalous that an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing God would exist in a world where there's evil and suffering like that. But, calm down, it'll be okay, I get there. It's also dealt with scandalously. The scandal of evil is dealt scandalously. So I wrestle with this not in an academic sense. The reason I bring this up is not to shock you, not to curry favor or sympathy, but is to say that there's a time when you have to get real with this. And I had to get real with it on October 11th. Very real with it. Now, I have my academic reasons, I have my philosophical reasons, I have my theological reasons for totally trusting in a God who can deal with suffering and evil and these kind of things that are a human thing. The origins of which I can speak to academically or theologically, which is just true. It is true. I think that the origins of these things is that God creates a world that is good. When you read the Genesis account, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good, every single sort of reference to the creation references the world, light, good, the day and the night, and all these things as good, and the creation of humanity as good. But there is a privation of the good that comes in the form of free will. It is not the result of manifestation of God in some sense, or this way in which the pure consciousness becomes manifest, which this is the fundamental difference, is that it is a matter of the free will, that God creates a world where love actually exists. True love can actually exist in the sense that free creatures can choose to accept or reject. And in the sense that love can exist, you're going to have the risk of rejection. And God is all that is good. God is all that is pure and good and personal. And so what Adam and Eve do essentially is live in this garden with just walking and talking, as the Bible says in Genesis chapter 3, in the cool of the day with God. And they're told, you can eat of anything you want. This is all yours. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for the day you eat of it you shall surely die. And of course you can already see there's a morality built right into the whole thing. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's not knowledge that's the problem. It is that these two innocents, because they've not experienced anything but good, can't handle the distinction between that which is good and that which is evil. And the fundamental idea of evil is rebellion against God. It is rebellion against that which is ultimately and purely good. And they live with that rule. We don't know how long. They live with that rule until the serpent comes and says, did God really say? And of course he misquotes God. And then Adam and Eve misquote God back. I don't know if you've noticed that if you've read your Bible. They said, oh no, God didn't say don't eat it. God said don't even touch it. Well, he never said that. And so they added to God's word. And so that is the fundamental, I think, nature of what's going on here, is there is this sense of human autonomy. Autonomy from two Greek root words, autos meaning self and nomos meaning law. And when you are autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. And so the foundation of evil essentially is the idea of utter self-seeking. It is ego gone amok, so to speak. It is ego manifested in a way that rejects its very source. Its very source. And so that's what happens, is that the serpent says, you eat this thing, you'll be like God. And before that, the fruit never tempted them. After that, we became desirous for food because they didn't want communion with God. They wanted to be him. And that's where it all ran amok. And this is a desire. This is something that plagues every human being in the Christian worldview. Every human being is autonomy seeking. Yes, we do wonderful things, and there is the imago Dei that's in us, this idea of being created in God's image. But there is a veering from this that is so serious. You know, I was speaking to an atheist friend of mine, this is years ago. Actually, he's an ordained secular humanist minister, which I found interesting. And, you know, he said, my biggest problem with you Christians is you're arrogant. I said, whoa. What is it? What do you mean? It's like, you guys think you have a lock on the truth, everyone's going to hell but you, and you know, this is terrible arrogance. I said, okay, that's interesting. Do you ascribe to the Secular Humanist Manifesto too? Now, secular humanists have a lot of manifestos, but the Secular Humanist Manifesto 2 is one of the most popular ones, so I happen to have a part of it memorized. And I said, do you agree with the following statement? Human beings have the ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives that is of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good of all, okay? Human beings have the ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives that aspire to the greater good of all. through personal fulfillment. And he said, yeah, I agree with that. I said, great. I believe that I'm a sinner. And that though there is good in me, there is the imago Dei in me, the sin will take over and it will seek itself in some way, shape, or form. And it can become grossly, monstrously evil, or it can become petty evil in many ways. And those evils are no less egregious. When I abuse someone in my language, when I overstep, when I'm selfish, et cetera, et cetera. I said, so I believe that I need someone who's not me to save me from me. But according to the Secular Humanist Manifesto, you believe in you. And yet I'm the one who's arrogant. Ultimately, that's what evil comes down to. It is a self-sufficiency apart from God that thinks it can be that thing and then imposes its will not only on God but on others as well, which is why there's the whole idea of a savior in the first place, is that you recognize this falling short of a moral standard and you implore mercy, and that mercy is meted out on a cross that is the way that justice and mercy are not forsaken but actually are resolved. That the paradox of how a just God and a merciful God can be both just and merciful and yet punish sin and forgive it at the same time. That's what the cross is. And so evil is this thing that we need to be cured of from outside of ourselves because it's in us. In other words, we can't be the solution. We in fact are the problem. And just to wrap it up, that's what I'm wrestling with everything that I've experienced. And I said it before, I think I said it in the Saturday service. The history that I have come to appreciate of what Jesus did on that cross and in that empty tomb, the investigation I've done in the past and now, the current, the present, is a God who takes suffering and does something about it. It's not an illusion in the Christian tradition. It's real to the point where the creator of everything deals with it. And so I trust what God will do with my suffering because of what God has done with his own.
Abdu, on behalf of Fred, I and all of us here, even that applause is a convey of our love and sympathy to you and your family. The thought of what you've endured with your father's murder is just beyond our capacity to comprehend.
And thank you for that. And by the way, I apologize for the indulgence. But when you deal with this, like I said, I debated bringing it up, and if I made it weird, I'm sorry. But I know of no better way to talk about it than through my own lived experience.
Yeah. I prefer to deal with suffering and evil as a concept out there and
me too.
A reality in here.
Yeah.
I wonder, Fred, if you could help us understand the Hindu understanding of life beyond death.
I'll do my best. This will dovetail into that. I want to make absolutely clear, you were talking about free will.
Yeah.
And Hinduism has the understanding of microcosmic free will, but macrocosmic predestination. And I'll explain that. Now, this involves reincarnation, which is, he asked about afterlife. Now, I realize that probably all of you in the audience here, you don't believe in reincarnation. And that's okay, because I know why. You were skeptics in your last life as well. Okay, so I'm just saying. So what I mean by that is each and every one of us has the free will to run our lives, to go in the direction that we want to go, meaning we can go towards God, we can go away from God. We can feed our senses till they burst, become hedonists, or we can live moderate lives. We can love our neighbors, we can hate our neighbors. We have that free will. However, as I mentioned, the Atman, the soul, is a part of divinity, and divinity cannot be a part of divinity. So it is also predestined. I don't know if there are any Calvinists here. I know that Calvinists are big on predestination. There's a kind of predestination in Hinduism as well, and that predestination is at some point in our spiritual evolution from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And each lifetime we are given the opportunity to go in the different directions. But if you're constantly taking from lifetime to lifetime the lesser road, the road of sense fulfillment and selfishness and all of that, it's pretty much guaranteed that something's going to hit you over the head, and you're going to realize, you know what? I'm not any happier than when I started. And you're going to start to move Godward. And at some point, you will come to a state of self-realization, of enlightenment. I don't want to use the perfection. If you've got a human body, good luck with that, okay? There's not perfection in this relative universe per se. But there is the state of pure realization where one not only sees the innate divinity within, but also the innate divinity without. Now, if, let's say, and spoiler alert, I have not reached the stage of self-realization yet, but let's say I did. How do I look upon you? Do I sit up here and go, I'm self-realized and you're not? No, I wouldn't do that. I would see the potential divinity in you just waiting to manifest. It'd be kind of like, Jeff, and this is only an example, I'm not going to do this. If I pull out a check for $1 million and gave it to you and said, Jeff, this is for you. Now, I also have a check for $1 million for everybody in this auditorium, and I want you to hand them out afterwards. You are going to look at everyone and saying, I'm a millionaire. You guys are too, you just don't know it yet. It's kind of like that. So there is a humility in self-realization, and you're not going, I am Oz the all-powerful or anything like that. No, it's a very humble feeling. So again, when you ask about afterlife, yes, we do embrace the understanding of what is called samsara, the wheel of birth and death. But in the end, every single human being, doesn't matter your religion, no religion, whatever, every human being is predestined, if you will, or every soul is predestined to ultimately merge with Atman and to exist eternally with no more samsara, no more coming back. And you are existing as part of Sat Chit Ananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. This is quite different from most Western concepts of heaven, where, when most people talk about heaven, they talk about it in very human terms, like, we could be in heaven right now. The only difference is that we'd all have great parking, or something like that. It's human experiences. Oh yeah, my uncle and my dad, they're in heaven, and I know they're playing cards together. And I realize that some people, they say that, but the tongue is a little bit in cheek. But this, you are existing as pure divine energy, not having what we would consider human experiences, except bathing in that ever-conscious, ever-new joy and love. So I'll stop there.
So how would you describe reincarnation?
Reincarnation is when the Atman, or the soul, and the karma, meaning the past actions of those previous lives, enter into someone who is in the fetal stage or even the embryo stage, okay, so let's say all of a sudden I have a heart attack, I'm gone. Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily going to, forgive the expression, jump into some woman's uterus right away. Okay. I would exist in a subtle world where my karma, I would still be working out my karma, meaning my actions that may be holding me back from divine realization. So there still is that opportunity to work that out. But we work out our karma better in a human form. And we have to wait until an appropriate time. I need an appropriate life to go where I'm supposed to go. So I could be in that subtle world for a while.
Okay.
And usually it's not a bad place to be, but it's not the ultimate.
Yeah.
And you keep coming back until that time where you reach this level of, the Buddhas would call it nirvana or Buddhahood, self-realization. Hindus also call it samadhi. And then at that point, and one could pass away and still have a few things to work out in the subtle realm before actually merging with the divine in there. So that's a thumbnail sketch. That is what reincarnation or rebirth.
Once one achieves that perfection, are you still reincarnated?
No, you're not. No, once you merge with the divine, you're kind of stuck, but it's a pretty great place to be stuck, quite frankly. So,
Okay.
yeah, you're good. You made it home.
Spiritual, non-physical state.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes, and again, your religion doesn't matter. It is how conscious can you become of divinity in your life. There are 4 paths to 4 yogas. Now, when you think of the word yoga, you often think of that physical manifestation where people can tie themselves up in. I can put my legs around my head.
Can you?
I can't. Not here, not now.
I was going to say, are we going to see this today?
No, you're not. I'm not wearing the right pants. You might get more than you bargained for. However, hatha yoga, that's the term for this physical discipline, is really a minor adjunct, but it's become very popular in the West. But the 4 main yogas are karma yoga, and I would define karma yoga, when I'm talking to Christians, the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. You do that, but you do that completely unattached to any reward, any, hey, God, see what I'm doing, and any attitude like that. Nothing. It has to come from deep in the heart because of your immense compassion and empathy. Number 2, bhakti yoga. Bhakti is the yoga of devotion. When your heart swells, knowing that you're in the presence of God in every aspect of your life. You're constantly talking to God, singing to God. That's bhakti. Then jnana yoga. Jnana is the acquiring of wisdom. So when people come here and they hear your brilliant words of wisdom and the brilliant words of wisdom that you shared today,
Oh, go on.
that's jnana yoga. And you also can do it from scriptural study and anything to increase your intellectual understanding. And then there's Raja yoga, which is the yoga of meditation.
Yeah.
So those are the ways that we acquire self-realization. But I don't want to indicate that it's a matter of works. You're not working towards that. It has to come from the heart, and it will automatically happen in the same way that what you said Christianity is all about doing those good things, but it has nothing to do with salvation. The same kind of thing. It's your consciousness. It's the state of consciousness that impels you to do it. You're not a bhakti yogi. You're not devotional because you read you should be one. You just become one. Devotion, you can't avoid it. When you're at that state, you're close to self-realization. And those elements I mentioned of karma and bhakti, jnana and raja, anyone from any religion or no religion can adopt, some or all of those practices, and that is the mark of someone who is probably close to ending their earthly sojourn and coming back.
Yeah. I apologize to all of you who are submitting questions. I'm looking at them here and realizing that we're having so much fun in conversation that we're not going to get to all of them. But let me dive into a few. Bree asks, Kevin asks, how would you respond to the belief that all roads lead to God?
Good question. Now, first of all, as I said, every single Atman, or soul, that has been expressed out of divinity is going to return to divinity. As far as all roads lead to God.
Or all religions lead to God?
Okay, one can be a member of any religion and come to this realization, because remember, it's not belief oriented per se. I often say that Hinduism is not a faith-based faith. It doesn't matter what you believe, it is the consciousness that you can come to. And I also mentioned that it's not that we believe what we want to believe, it's what we are able to believe. So yes, someone from any religion or no religion can come to this state of self-realization, but it's the religion isn't necessarily the vehicle. That's what I want to say. So, yes, you can be a Jew, a Hindu, a Christian, whatever, or you can be nothing at all. Because we believe that I'm repeating myself, that every Atman is a part of divinity. You can't have a portion of divinity that is separate from itself. So ultimately, yes, every single Atman is predestined at some point to merge into that ever-conscious, ever-existing bliss.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Abdu, how would you respond to that? All religions lead to God.
How I would say it is that, it sounds like a really respectful statement, all roads lead to God. And as I've studied various roads, and I'm certainly not a PhD in all of them or any of them, frankly, but as I started to come to understand them and understand the paths, including the one that Fred so eloquently talked about, is that they're very different in some fundamental and important ways. So for example, if I'm not mistaken, at some point, though Buddhism was a sect of Hinduism, considered that I can't remember if it's Theravada or Mahayana Buddhism that actually denies the existence of the Atman at all. So one of the fundamental tenets, or not fundamental tenets, but one of the features of Buddhism is the denial of the Atman as a thing at all. So you're in a accretion of karma, and then once that karma is worked out, you extinguish. You don't become part of the Brahman. There is no Brahman. And so that's a fundamental distinction and a difference. So when you say all roads lead to God, all roads don't even claim to. So when you say that, it's disrespectful, actually, because you're not taking, I'm not saying you are, I'm saying this, as it's framed, this commonly sort of bumper sticker phrase takes all these different roads and says, you all believe basically the same thing. And you're disrespecting thousands of years of many traditions. You're not taking any of them seriously. So I give people what I call the dignity of difference. I give you so much dignity that I'm willing to differ with you on these things and talk about these things in a fundamental and real way. So for example, if I were to talk about Christianity and Hinduism and the self-realization, a Christian would essentially say that the thing that holds me back from communion with my God is my belief that I have union with God in any way, shape, or form. And that holds me back. And so that person, it would seem logically to me, would not be able to attain that consciousness, because if they adhere to that religious belief, they don't have that consciousness. They literally have the opposite of that. So you can't be a Christian and then achieve self-realization, because your fundamental belief is that's a sin to think that. I would think Orthodox Jew would be the same thing, and a Muslim would be the same thing. So now we're talking about most of the population of the earth. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just saying that is. So, in other words, the idea of universalism, that we'll all get there eventually, has to entail necessarily that everyone is essentially wrong, and they'll realize it one day. Like Christians are wrong about there being a separation between humanity. The dualism is wrong. God and humanity are not different things. We're all the waves in the ocean and these kind of things. And you'll eventually realize how wrong you are. And Christianity might be your path for this life, but it won't be your ultimate path. And so I think that is, whether you agree with it or disagree with that isn't what I'm saying. I happen to disagree with it for some I think pretty hefty reasons, but let's not pretend that they're the same thing. They are not. If they were, then we would all believe the same thing, and we clearly do not. It doesn't mean we can't sit on a stage and have lunch together and joke and have a great ride and get backed up. We were, by the way, when we were driving back to the hotel, we were at a stoplight, and a woman decided she's going to go in reverse and back up into my car, and gave me and Fred and my son an understanding of we might find out who's right and who's wrong right now. That's how I would respond to that question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Fred, so admittedly, the belief that Christians say, no, you need to place faith and trust in Jesus to achieve heaven beyond death, that is not a popular view, for those outside. One of the views of Hinduism that's not popular would be the caste system. Mm-hmm. Do you mind commenting on that and helping us understand?
I'd be happy to. It is a rather involved and nuanced story, but I'll do my very best in the time that we have.
Yeah.
So, in scriptures, for instance, if I was to ask you if you are a sinner, I could only imagine you would say yes.
It's true.
But if I would say, well, you're a Christian and the Bible says you're a sinner, so I'm assuming you sin a lot. You go out of your way to sin because the Bible says you're a sinner. And you would say, no, actually, the Bible tells me to avoid sin as best possible, but my nature is sin.
Yeah.
Scriptures can be descriptive, prescriptive, and proscriptive. So, for instance, a prescriptive edict of the Bible in Christianity would be obey the Sabbath. It's telling you to do something positive. Something proscriptive, do not murder. Don't do that. And then there's descriptive. This is the way things are. Take it or leave it, this is the way things are. So in the so-called caste system, we prefer the term Varna, but in that, and the reason it's called a caste system is because the Portuguese came to India and they saw that the hierarchy of society was similar to their hierarchy of society, and they referred to that as casta.
So they used the word.
Yeah, okay, so the Indians go, well, caste, casta, okay. So my point is that societies are hierarchical in nature. And the four Varnas are Brahmins, who are the intellectuals and the spiritual leaders. Then you have Kshatriyas, people who are the governing class, Vaishyas, who are the merchants and farmers and all. And then you have Shudras, who are the laborers. And I believe that if somehow we were cut off from the rest of civilization, right? If all of a sudden we, by necessity, had to become our own society, naturally there would develop people who would fit into those categories, not because somebody said, oh, you're this and you're that. It becomes natural. Leaders tend to lead. Followers tend to follow. People who are adept at one thing, that's what they do. And so the original understanding of the caste system was, it was not birth-based, and there's several scriptural passages to make that out. And B, that there was some fluidity, that one could be born into one kind of family and move into another family. Unfortunately, that system became rigidified. Is that a word? It is now. Okay, and that is unfortunate. I have an observation. I don't know if you all share this, but religion can be corrupted. Okay, so just know that. And that's what happened with the caste system. It became very rigid. There was even this nonsense that has no scriptural foundation whatsoever, that someone who's a Shudra, you're born a Shudra, that's a punishment. And you have to come back and be a Vaishya, then you have to be a Kshatriya, then you have to be a Brahmin. And then when you're a Brahmin, then you can start thinking about getting out of this place, right? There's a Shudra can be a saint just as easy as anybody else. And many of our great spiritual figures in Hinduism were of the lower castes. And every great spiritual figure spoke against caste bigotry. So there's a difference between me saying, Jeff, you have great labor skills. You're a wonderful carpenter, so you're a Shudra. And Abdu, you are a brilliant mind. You're a Brahmin. But when I go, you're a better person than Jeff because you're a Brahmin, that's where bigotry comes from. And many people have suffered because of that bigotry. Now, here's another thing, too. It's very much a social institution, it has been in India, that actually pervades all religions. It really does. Not in every community, but in many of them. And in today's India, it's rare to find any sort of caste bigotry outside of the smaller, more rural areas. But all of my friends who have lived or live in the big cities, the more cosmopolitan, 21st century thinking people say it has nothing to do with their lives. And practically all of the people I know who have Indian parents who are born here, so second generation, they have no idea what their caste is.
Okay.
But yes, there has been a history of bigotry. I'm not going to deny that, and people can still suffer today in certain communities because of it, but also it can go beyond religion. I saw a documentary about a Pakistani girl who married someone outside of her, they don't call it a caste,
right,
but her social level, and her father shot her. Okay? She didn't die, but he shot her, hoping that she would die, because that was a dishonor to the family. Yeah. So I hope, believe me, there's a lot more. I'll say one other thing too. The British really, really encouraged caste bigotry because when they colonized India, they knew that to divide and conquer was their strategy. So if they can keep these communities fighting, they're okay. Their place is safe.
Yeah.
So they're still dealing with that.
You'll hear sometimes, folks, people say, when you get together, don't talk about politics or religion. And you can decide on politics, but I would tell you, speaking honestly about our convictions regarding spirituality is so important. And I think we're seeing that modeled here. And I love talking about the journey of pursuing truth and faith. And I'm not the only one, huh? Friends, we could go all night, but I'm going to just ask that we close with one more question. I've read a number, and again, I apologize that we've only been able to, comment on a few. But one of the themes that I'm seeing goes back to the title of our gathering. That's Why I Converted. And I wonder if you guys would each just take a minute or two and explain the essence of conversion in your various faiths. Fred, you talked about that being in your mid-30s when you realized, no, it's happened. I am a Hindu. Can you speak to that a little more and help us understand what was going on there?
Yes, there are a couple of things. First of all, I suddenly realized I walk like a Hindu and I talk like a Hindu. I'm a Hindu. And I also realized that when I stayed outside of the barrier, outside of the community, I could not be a part of and help the community the way a family member can. Do either of you know that book that was written several years ago about a man in Afghanistan called 3 Cups of Tea?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so according to apparently this Afghani custom, the first time you are invited to tea, you are a guest. The second time you're invited to tea at someone's home, you are a friend. And the third time you're invited, you are family. And I thought about that for a while. I go, that's stupid. No, You've got to be invited to tea a fourth time, and you want to be part of the family, do the dishes. And I wasn't doing the dishes. I was reaping all of the benefits. I was engaged in a wonderful meditation practice that I continue to this day. My God, the Indian food I was able to eat. You know, if Hinduism ever wanted to record a commercial and they hired me to voice it, the tagline would be, Hinduism, come for enlightenment, but stay for dinner. So really, I was just the beneficiary of this love, this community and because Hinduism is not evangelical, we do not go looking for members. I think do you know that? Yeah. The only people we are allowed to evangelize are Mormons.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, I'm sure for the same reason that you evangelize Mormons, they're the best tithers. So, no, we don't evangelize Mormons. So anyway, no one was saying, come on in, the water's fine. They were just allowing me to be who I was and find my own way. And finally, I realized, no, I need to be a part of this community, and I need to identify as a Hindu to be able to do the kind of work I want to do. I had no idea that it would lead to me being ordained a pracharik and being a part of the organizations I'm a part of. No, no. If I knew that, I never would have been a Hindu.
Fred, we as Christians have baptism as a celebration of official entry into the community. Is there something like that in Hinduism?
If someone came to me and said, I want to be a Hindu, well, first of all, I'd have a conversation with them and just see where they were spiritually. And if I thought to myself, yeah, this person is quite sincere and he or she wants to be a Hindu, I would say, well, consider tithing. No, I wouldn't say that. Really, while certain sects of Hinduism do have prescribed methods for joining that sect in the same way, for instance, if somebody wants to be a Christian, I believe, am I correct, that if they openly say, I want Jesus to be my Savior, I'm a sinner, they're a Christian.
That's right.
I mean, that's it. Now, baptism is also something that normally follows that.
We would describe it as an outward celebration of an inward commitment that's already happened.
Yes, exactly. But now, if I go, oh, really? So that's all I need to do to be a Christian? That's great. Then that's what I'm going to do, and I want to be Catholic. And you'd have to go, no. Being Catholic is being a part of that branch of Christianity. You got to go through a whole lot more than just saying, I want Jesus in my life. So there are some sects of Hinduism that do require some sort of formal initiation ceremony, but I would say Hinduism in general, all you got to do is show up to the temple and say, I'm a Hindu.
Okay.
I mean, that's it. Nobody is going to challenge you. If you come to the temple and say, I'm a Hindu, nobody will say, well, tell me, how are you a Hindu? Okay, no, that doesn't count. That wouldn't, no, never had that issue.
Thank you, Fred.
Sir.
Abdu, how would you quickly describe how someone converts to Christianity?
Well, I actually would borrow from Fred, borrowing from Paul, where it says if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That's that. It's pretty simple. Now, the thing that I think often is misunderstood, and Dallas Willard once pointed this out, that there are way too many vampire Christians, people who want Jesus just for his blood. They just want to be saved. They call Jesus Savior. They don't call him Lord. And calling him Lord is part of the formula, and it's that submission to who Jesus actually is and recognizing that I need Jesus not only to save me, but also to be the Lord of my life. And that's a discipleship process. So salvation happens when you put your full confidence in what Jesus did for you. Sanctification happens for the rest of your life. And it is, I often put it this way, when you chart a child's growth, it's steady. People don't tend to shrink before the age of 25, or even after that. And I'm still waiting for my shrinkage. But although I think I did shrink an inch, I think I'm 6'7" now. But the spiritual life is a stock chart. It's got its peaks and its valleys. It's generally up and to the right, hopefully, but there's some valleys and some dips in that. So salvation and conversion really happens when you make that confession and you sincerely mean it. That's the deal. It's over. I will tell you from the personal thing that happened with me was as I was going through this journey, and as I said before, I said this morning during the service, and I'll say it again today, is that when I went on this search, when those words of John the Baptist convicted me that I was being quite hypocritical because I was requiring Christians to abandon tradition in favor of truth, which I thought was Islam, and so willing to have them go through it, I wasn't all that willing to go through it myself. At least subconsciously, I didn't realize I was holding back. It took me 9 years. Now, I had come to conclusions about the historicity of the resurrection, and that you can have beyond a reasonable doubt, I believe, that Jesus actually is a matter of history, rose from the dead, and that therefore vindicates his claim to be the Son of God who can take away your sins. Because if he died and stayed dead, there'd be no reason to believe him. But if he died and rose from the dead, you should believe him, because guys who rise from the dead tend to be credible. So to me, I was having an intellectual assent. And this is the fundamental difference between conversion and belief. For me as a Christian, this is what I realized because it took so long. I didn't become a Christian after 9 years because the answers were hard to find. I had sufficient reasons to be a Christian. Not all the reasons. I still don't have all the reasons, by the way. I would never condescend to you and puff myself up by saying, by the way, any question you throw at me, I got all the answers. That's absolutely untrue. I had sufficient reasons, good reason to be a Christian within 2 years of beginning that search. I wrestled with those things for 7 more years because of the consequences, not the least of which was to identity and who I thought I was. Because the answers are not hard to find, but they are hard to embrace because of the consequences and what's going to happen with you and what identity comes. I had intellectually assented to Jesus' claim to be God. That is found in the Bible. The Bible has been transmitted accurately down through the centuries, despite the various copies and the way that the transmission actually happens, that he died on a cross and he rose from the dead in vindication of his claim. I intellectually assented to all of that, but it didn't sink in the longest journey anything can make is the 17 or so inches from the head to the heart. And conversion is when it goes from the head to the heart, and the connection, the bridge, is actually solid. It's a solid connection. Now, do you have to have all these intellectual reasons to be a Christian? Absolutely not. I know plenty of people who are way better Christians than me who've gone through none of the journey I went through on the intellectual search. But for me, it was that head-to-heart knowledge. Assent is one thing. Embrace is another. And I remember that when I was in a friend's home and I had just read Romans 5:8, which I quoted for you earlier, about that greatest possible being expressing the greatest possible virtue in the greatest possible way, and the relationship that entails. I was holding back because I knew that if I experienced the fullness of that relationship, I would have to give my loyalty and my allegiance to the one who made that relationship possible, forsaking all others, not in a combative sense, but in a sense that I would have to sacrifice some things in that sense. And so when I held back, I told a friend about it. I was in his basement. Well, it's not his basement, it's a subfloor. Anyway, there's a lot of basements in Michigan that are basically made up into real rooms. I was down there. The woman who would become my wife was upstairs. Me and my best buddy were downstairs. And I said, Romans 5:8 just struck me as amazing today. I mean, this idea that God would sacrifice for a being like me, who clearly falls short all the time, and anybody else who rejects him. It's just amazing. I mean, that's amazing. Who does that? And then he said to me, he's like, kind of like I walk like a Christian, I talk like a Christian kind of a thing. He says, can I ask you a question? Do you believe that's actually true? And I said, yeah, I think I do actually believe it's true. He says, are you willing to make it like the creed of your life, the way you're going to live now? And I said, yeah, I think I am. He says, what's holding you back? And I said, I don't think anything. Nothing worthwhile, at least. Nothing that made any sense to hold me back. And we prayed that prayer. And I got to tell you something. This is weird. Nicole came down. My buddy's wife came down. We prayed that prayer. And I immediately felt nauseous. Because now I've done it. You see, the greatest sin in Islam is called shirk. It's where you associate partners to God. And I just got done praying to the Father, through the Spirit, in the name of the Son. And if the Muslims are right, I did all kind of stuff right there. And I thought, this is no turning back now. But it has to be true. And I wanted to make sure I gave my life to it, because it would not only be based on feeling, but based on something that would sustain my feeling, which is this knowledge that it's true. And then after that, I realized, oh my goodness, this is eternal life. And I never looked back since then. So the conversion process isn't just assent to beliefs. It's got to be embrace, but embrace of the one who makes those beliefs possible.